Home. It means wildly different things to different people, sometimes even to the same person. Over half a century, I've lived in many places, and all these places live in me. Yet there's one place, one point of origin, one point of return that my soul calls home. I'm Rachel Schroeder, and today on Poetry Between Friends, Derralyn Rennix, poet, veterinarian, Buddhist chaplain, hospice bereavement volunteer, teacher and facilitator of personal and professional well-being, and my friend and mentor in compassionate communication, joins me to excavate home in our poems Divine Boot Camp and Controlled Burn. If you'd like to read along with us, you'll find our poems in the show notes.
Divine Boot Camp by Rachel Schroeder. In a toxic swamp of festering wounds, fed by an underground river of something's wrong with me, the incarnation begins. Perfection, that fairy glamour, hangs in the mist, obscuring the muck, curating a mirage of stilted beauty. From below, stealthy, aggravated, and steamy, resentment, jealousy, and shame bubble up through the sludge, poisoning the air. These are the noxious fumes that taught my lungs constriction and wheezing. To practice asthma, to save me from inhaling ages of psychic sewage, byproduct of unfelt feelings, those ignored messengers, and disinherited needs, yearning, orphaned quarks of vitality and meaning, oozing down ancestral lines from generation to generation, partially thwarted by towering dams of blame, diverting vibrancy, separating the living from life. This is the curse that keeps on giving. This is the place where God divided into self and other, where she went as far from himself as she could go, where duality seems more real than singularity, isolation more true than belonging, where loneliness reigns, consuming the heart. In this God-forsaken wasteland, some part of me lingers, struggling to stand on arthritic, plantar fasciatic feet, despite the agonized memory of contortion in my lumbosacral spine. Longing for solid ground to support, relieve, and nourish my bones, nerves, soul. Here, stifled by, you can tell me anything, and you mustn't tell anyone, and not like that, like this, and you don't understand business, and I know you better than you know yourself, and I will never let you fail. Here, I gasp for encouragement, acceptance, respect, freedom, understanding, compassion, inclusion, belonging, peace, and truth. Long ago, I dreamed myself out of the swamp, crawling on my belly, then swimming into crystal clear water. Refreshed and cleansed, I climbed out of ooze onto terra firma, drenched in sun. But gurglings whispered in my bowels and betrayed searing pain and noxious ooze colonizing my gut, leaking through membranes into the machine, up to the motherboard, gunking up the works, short-circuiting the system, frying wires, sending false messages, failure alert, system failing. I am failing, am failure. The swamp is where the incarnation began, but it is not home. Still, I'm not proud. After so many years and tears and energy and time and money and attention and intention and care poured into clawing my way out, sloughing off the sludge and purifying myself, the sludge yet lives in me, clogging the internal mechanism, keeping me from running optimally, keeping me from home. Never again, the ancestors say, I will not be, am not victim, not swamp thing. Swamp survivor I am, learning to thrive, amateur gardener, learning to cultivate, sunflower seeds hiding in the muck, nature's alchemist, patiently awaiting the season to bloom and grow to maturity, to absorb the poison and transmute it into good medicine. Toxic swamp becomes fertile ground, restoring the living to life. And standing on my own two widespread feet in my naturally curving, erect spine on this now nutrient-rich, oxygen-fed earth, I breathe and become big enough, brave enough, awake enough to feel rage and terror and despair and longing. Here, in the very spot where the incarnation began, may I begin again. May I reclaim dignity, respect, purpose, connection, and contribution. May I find comfort knowing I'm not alone in feeling and not feeling, in needing and longing and mourning and being. And may I let myself be. Suffering doesn't make us weak or defective. It makes us alive. Perhaps it's the divine boot camp for humility, strength, and wisdom, where in the presence of others, I learn to honor life moving through me as you learn to honor life moving in you.
Controlled Burn by Derralyn Rennix. I drove by my old home the other day. Funny how I couldn't remember the names of the roads, or which was the right turn down memory lane. Yet, like a homing pigeon, I eventually found my way back to the nest, back to this barren land I once called home. I wonder, do houses cherish a child's divine dreams? Do they preserve their ancestral lineage as mortar between yellow bricks? Do they knit generations of families together into healing prayers? Do their descendants speak echoes of their origins, telling tales around the kitchen table while giving thanks for food served on chipped china plates? This place, my childhood home, where fighting roosters roamed free. We rose every day to the same old scrambled eggs and the rhythms of homework and household chores. Mimosas were not found in glasses with ice, but trees adorned in frilly pink skirts. In this home, the workday ended by the monotonous beep of the microwave. Everyday laborers were rewarded with mediocre mystery meats, too tough to chew, even harder to swallow. Religion became a social sport, played against imaginary rivals where only perfect goals counted. The purpose of life was simmered down to a game of potluck in Sunday dresses. In this house, we were bilingual, speaking not only our native tongue, but also the subterranean language of insinuation and expectation. Self-righteous commandments incanted as thou shalt nots to protect a fragile mirage. Success was marked in dollars and cents, something for daughters to achieve if they were to be seen behind the incarnation of prodigal sons. I left this house of incarceration to look deep into toxic things. Toxicology, not taxidermy. I study lethal doses of poisons, not to preserve death for pride's egotistical display, rather an attempt to conserve mankind and save my sanity. Yet this place still whispers my name. I stand on this grave site, over the charred bones of my great ancestral home, bartered away for the almighty dollar, before being left bereft, its flesh sacrificed in a controlled burn, turned frozen ash under a bloody moon, its incinerated remains pregnant with family memories. Singed fairy wings carry the scent of burnt wrapping paper, crumble in my open hands, blown free by the wind's long exhale. May they fertilize this land in spring. May this fertile ground grow upright. So, how was it to hear me read your poem and for you to read mine?
Well, it was lovely to hear you read my poem because it's not something I have an opportunity for very often to hear your words in someone else's voice. It really does transform the poem, just like these poems are about transformation. So I thought it was a really interesting gift. And you know, Rachel, I know you remember, but our listeners do not know that I balked at that. I had a hard time with that. I think a lot of it was because I really wasn't sure I could represent your poem well. It took me a lot of times reading your poem through to be able to kind of get a rhythm and a feeling for the poem. I think I had to sink into the poem to become the poem in order to read it. And I think there was this kind of desperation in some of the way that you had, and maybe the readers will be able to see this on the website, but the way that you had structured the poem, where the words were coming, one word per line, and how I was to read that. And so I practiced it in different ways, and I decided to read some of them fast and some of them slower because I thought it would give that sense of trying to escape, that clawing, that desperation, that needing, that wanting, and then that receiving. It was also really interesting for me to try to do the different quotes in different voices. So that took a while to practice, but it was really, I think I became the poem in reading it. I could see through your eyes in reading it, but I could also see through my own eyes. And so it really was a generous opportunity.
So I'm so glad that you opened to it. I know it was challenging at first, and I love how you read it. I found it just relieving to begin with because, as I mentioned, I was nervous about this poem, sharing it. And in hearing you read it, it relaxed me. And I was like, it's okay. And your reading was so authentic and so inhabited. And I could feel that you were channeling what I was channeling, let's put it that way. And also, there was your own spin on it, which I really appreciated. And like you said, helped me to see the poem in a new light as well. And it almost helped me to honor it a little bit more as not just some therapy practice, but hey, no, this is a poem. It's a poem. It is a poem. And, it's funny. I was a little bit nervous about reading yours in part because I knew you were not totally convinced about this whole reading each other's poems thing. And I appreciated living into, there's a casualness about parts of it. And then there's a formality in other parts. And I just really tried to let the poem tell me how to read it.
That's always best. Let the words guide us.
So, why don't we talk about the origin of these poems and how this episode is coming to be, came to be? I will start by saying that if this was a tennis game, I served this poem to you. And then what happened?
Well, I panicked and I thought, oh, I can't do this. There's no way I can be on a podcast. I'm not a professional. I just write poetry. So it was really scary. And I think, Rachel, you've been great coaxing me through this so that I'm here today. Yeah. So I really appreciate that you were willing to share this poem with me and that you chose this poem for me to read, hoping that I would be able to give it voice. And I think that it was just a really beautiful coming together of how we know each other through the compassion course. And there was so much of that course in this poem. So I could tell why you chose this poem for me to read.
For people who don't know, the Compassion Course is rooted in the teachings of Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication. And Derralyn was the facilitator of the practice group that I was part of. It's kind of amazing because we've known each other now about a year and a half. And it's funny because in some ways we don't know each other at all. Like we don't know each other's outer lives that much, but we know a lot about each other's inner lives because of the deep work that you do in compassionate communication, really practicing empathy on a very deep level with each other. And you were just such a wonderful facilitator. The way that you held the container of the group. Previously I'd always heard of safe spaces, but you shared with us brave space. And that's really stuck with me. It was just a really beautiful reframing.
You certainly brought a lot to the group. And in fact, what struck me with your poem was how it showed how much work you've done to climb out of the toxic swamp. And this compassion course that we met in, I mean, the thing that I really appreciated so much about you is that you really took it to heart.
Yeah, I did write this poem during the compassion course, but the prompt came from a healer that I was working with. He works with the energy system, the energy body, but also psychology and emotions and spiritually. And in one session, we were talking about kind of the territory that I grew up in, but like more the emotional, energetic territory. What was that like? So then there were other words and images that came up as we talked, and he had me write them down, and it became a recipe. And then he said to me, write something like a paragraph that just kind of puts all this together in a summary of this experience. And at the time, I was writing poetry, and so it just naturally became a poem. And what I appreciated in the writing of it was I could feel that it was writing medicine. Like the writing itself was doing healing work. And it broadened the perspective too, because as I wrote about the swamp, it also encouraged me to see beyond it and also to see the entirety of it. That that existed because there was history before it. I mean, as the poem talks about this psychic sewage that comes down through generations, that it's generational pain. Or the the sludge comes from way, way upriver and it's generations and generations. And just looking at how it's epigenetic trauma that gets passed down. And then also how it was encouraging me to look at, well, I don't live in that place anymore. But yes, some of it still lives in me, but also looking at, well, and how am I climbing out of it? How have I to some degree? How am I continuing to? And also, how do we all? Because all of us have some sort of toxicity in our growing up, I think, to some degree. So, coming back to your poem, I'm curious. So,
Oh,
after,
I want to talk more
oh,
about your
oh,
poem.
okay, okay, okay. And then we'll go to your poem.
Yeah, I just really wanted to say, first of all, I love that it started as a recipe, I think, for medicine. And I don't know if you remember this, Rachel, but I actually facilitate some groups in poetry for wellness. It's actually called through the Institute of Poetic Medicine. And I have found poetry to be such a vehicle for healing myself and others in these lovely circles that I participate in. But I think, what I found with your poem, it really expresses all of the work that you've done and how you point out in the poem how it's not a one and done kind of thing. It's a lifetime of practice. You claw out of the muck and then you sink back down and then you rise again and again until finally you'll hopefully blossom. And it reminds me of Thich Nhat Hanh's "No mud, no lotus," that we are all born in the mud. It's just that some of us look up at the sky and we put that effort into surfacing. And sadly, some of us don't see the sky through the mud, or the effort to get there is just too great. So I really appreciated that. And I also really loved how you integrated feelings and needs into your poem, recognizing that we all have them and that it's about bringing our attention to them as we go through our lives. To me, your poem, it's about what's possible, that no matter where you find yourself right now, it will change. And you and all beings have the choice to aim for that sky. And we don't have to do it perfectly, no matter what we're told. We just have to do our best, which is all we ever can do. So that poem, it actually gives me hope. And I think that that's what I took away from it. And I hope that was your intention.
I'm so happy to hear that because I think we all, to varying degrees, go through difficulties that are baked into this sense of home, where we start in any given incarnation. Yes, it's always still possible to overcome, to transcend, to heal. I do believe that. And I just love, the sunflower. I actually created an entire movement theater piece about a sunflower creature because I was so moved by the fact that sunflowers, they truly are nature's alchemists. They were used after Chernobyl to heal the earth, to eat the toxicity in the earth, to restore it. And I've just been so moved by that. It stays with me as a symbol and as an inspiration.
I was in a poetry group once where one of the poets used sunflower as a verb. And that was like so amazing that if you think about it, we can actually sunflower ourselves.
That's amazing. Now I want to steal it.
You can write a poem.
I'm really curious about what happened after the fear and loathing. Well, not loathing, but after the the terror when you received the serve of this poem. Please tell us what happened from that point until your poem was completed.
So I read through your poem a few times and I wasn't quite sure what you meant by having a poetic conversation, how to write a poem off of your poem. And Because Rachel, thanks a lot. You didn't give me a lot of direction on what you wanted. So I read through your poem, and what I did is I highlighted and copied down words and phrases that struck a chord with me. And then I looked at that list for inspiration and a common thread in which to form a poem from. And you can tell I try to include some of your words directly into my poem. There's actually quite a few of those words, like divine and ancestor and generation. So there's a lot of words that actually feed directly into my poem and gave it life. I actually do this a lot, finding words and writing poems around them. I even have a little bowl that I collect words and then I take words out of them. A sunflower, maybe I'll put that in there. So I worked with incarnation as well, and as an example, and I found similar words like that: incineration, insinuation, expectation. This thread was growing. And I also wanted to model some of the form where you wrote, like where you say here. So I used in this home, in this house, very kind of following that form. And also parts of your poem, they took on a prayer. So I kind of worked that in.
Yeah, I could totally hear that in the poem. And yes, I didn't give you much direction on purpose because I really wanted it to be what would naturally flow from you. And I love what happened here. I mean, I noticed there are lots of similarities and also contrasts between the poems. I noticed that controlled burn, even it kind of borrows and streamlines the plot from Divine Boot Camp, which is cool. And I feel like reading and then in hearing your poem, it's almost as if you're saying, I hear you, and this is how the experience of home was for me and how I integrated and transcended it. That's how it lands for me. And I'm kind of wondering, was it a little bit like that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I really wanted you to feel heard, feel witnessed with your poem, and my poem being a reflection back, but from my own perspective, so that, we were in dialogue, which is what you told me we were going to be. And so these poems conveying that real sense of home. I think that's the thread that I was following.
Yeah, and it totally comes through. And I feel like Divine Boot Camp is kind of like a dark fairy tale in a way and like a travelogue of the poet's inner life. And Controlled Burn is kind of more cinematic, I would say. And it's like the scenes of that you'd see in a movie of that experience. And I love how they're different in that way, but very much in conversation. And yeah, I really did feel heard. And I felt that sense of mutuality, that sense of, I hear you and I feel it too. And here's how I felt it, which also it's very generous because it's giving of yourself also. So there's like deeper connecting that happened in then reading your poem between us. I really appreciated too, like the contrasting that went on. Like, for instance, I noticed that it seems like each stanza of Controlled Burn speaks directly to the stanzas of Divine Boot Camp. Sometimes, because Divine Boot Camp is pretty long, one of your stanzas would speak to several of mine. Like, for instance, in the second stanza of Controlled Burn, do houses cherish a child's divine dreams? And do they knit generations of families together into healing prayers? Which I heard in contrast to the fifth stanza of Divine Boot Camp, where it says, ages of psychic sewage. And it's talking about the epigenetics of family trauma being passed down. And it's almost as if Controlled Burn is offering like an antidotal perspective. Like to that psychic sewage, here's the knitting together of generations of families into healing prayers. And also that the houses cherishing the child's divine dreams, like the flip side. And also the house becomes a character. I love the cherishing of the house, of its inhabitants, that sense of nurturing. And I feel too that both of our poems very much feel like they're yearning for nurturing and for nourishment. And I love that here there's a sense that the house itself is providing some of that, the nurturing. It's beautiful. And then there's in the 10th stanza of Divine Boot Camp, I dreamed my way out of the swamp. And in the 6th stanza of Controlled Burn, I left this house of incarceration. And I really appreciate how there's similarity in the experience, but it's so different in how it's expressed, and the places are different. One is a swamp, one is a house, one is a dreaming out of it that's maybe a little less conscious. And the other one, I left this house. There's a very clear choice, a conscious decision to leave.
There was so much to work off of, I think, with your poem. And I love the image. Speaking of dreams, I love the image of fairies. So I incorporated that and the mirage as well. Just, what is reality? Is it what we make of it? And how do we interpret our reality? So I think for me, a lot of the links between the poems really was, I was speaking of a specific real place, and your place was more metaphorical. So I think that was an interesting way to put them together as well. So would you like to hear more about like how my actual poem came to be?
Yes, please.
So I had just had my birthday when I received your poem. And on my birthday, during my birthday, on my way to brunch with my husband, we decided to drive by one of our former homes. And I guess we actually hadn't lived there for over 20 years. It was a historical farmhouse in a nice salt box style house with lots and lots of barns and outbuildings. And this was our first home that we owned together when we moved back to Maine. So it was a place of significance for us in our lives. And so we decided to drive by, only we couldn't remember the way. And we were laughing in the car because we were like, is this the right road? I don't know. Is this the right road? And so we were just kind of hunting it. And, you think something like that, it would be so easy, but we forget. And so we kept turning and we finally did eventually find it. And when we pulled in, we noticed that the grass hadn't been mowed in a while and the driveway had all but disappeared into the field. So we parked our car and we waded through the tall grass to look around. And it was clear no one had lived there for a long, long time. So we did what anybody would do, any normal person. We peeked in the windows. And a rush of memories just came flooding back, as we looked through the windows, seeing the same old wallpaper. And so a wave of sadness rushed over us, for this house that we once called home was in such a state of disrepair. The same with the other buildings on the property. They were really run down. And in some ways, I wish we hadn't have actually even driven by that day. Because these memories, the memories that we cherish in our minds, can be more vivid than the reality of it. And what is reality? It was real when we lived there. And those memories were created during that time, and they continue to live through us. So that was how I began writing the poem. And like all poems do, or at least mine do anyway, it took a detour to my childhood home. And it is actually true that it had been burned recently in a training by the local fire department. And though I and all of my family, for that matter, hadn't lived anywhere near there in a very, very long time, it really stung to think about it being destroyed, that I could never go back there and it wouldn't be there. And to me, I guess it was kind of like losing a loved one. And so I mourned its loss.
And actually, that makes me think about the ends of both of our poems, whereas Divine Boot Camp is the poet invoking a blessing or a prayer for the poet's own growth. In Controlled Burn, it's a prayer or a blessing for the land and for the house and for the memories and the ancestors.
Memory is what Controlled Burn was about. what happens to memories when they're gone, when the people that hold them or the places that hold them disappear. And so we're going back to mourning because this poem really represented mourning the loss of places that were really part of my life. And to me, it was a lot of it was like when my mother died, and I could no longer ask her questions and receive an answer. And so those forgotten memories were just gone. And I wondered about memories of places we've lived and who keeps them safe for the future generations to learn from. Does the land hold those memories? And I think in some cultures, people believe that. And so I really did make the land and the bones of the land alive in the poem to store those and to pass those memories forward.
It really comes through palpably in the poem, in that section of the bones of the land towards the end and the singed fairy wings. I caught that fairy and I love, because I've got fairy glamour in the beginning of my poem, and I love how you come round to the fairy at the end and that it's like in the ashes, this wrapping paper, but it's on singed fairy wings. That element of kind of fantasy comes into something that is so visceral and so concrete, it's so material, the ashes and the burning, and that it's the bones of this place. And yet, in contrast, the singed fairy wings. It was so unexpected. I love too how, let me find that line.
While you're looking for that, you were talking about the process of the weaving of these words from your poem into mine. And it was a lot like that line, knitting generations of families together into healing prayers. And that really is the power of words and the power of poetry, that we can create our own meaning, our own transformation through the power of words.
Yeah, I'm ever floored by that. It just keeps me in a state of wonder when I think about that. Like, how amazing is it? It's like spell casting, it's like white magic.
I think it's brave, and you have to be willing to follow the thread no matter where it takes you. If you are constricted when you're writing, I think that it's not as liberating as if you just allow, whatever is coming up to make it to the page, not good or bad, just let it be.
Yeah. I did very much feel that in writing this, which also is why it's a little tender, and I let it be raw. I didn't do a lot of editing on it. And I kind of felt, even when I went to do more editing, I was like, I don't think so. I think it needs to be left alone. It needs to just be as it is. And I need to just trust it and let it be. Kind of like the poem tells me.
May I let myself be, right?
Yeah.
That's your line from the poem. Maybe
Yeah.
it's, may I let this poem be.
Yeah. That's new for me. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely wrestled with perfectionism, and my parents also wrestled with that. And there was mental illness in the family, and my dad came from a generation where you didn't really name those things. They were more things that were talked about in hushed tones, that were kept secret, that were not really dealt with in ways that could help someone heal. And I have a lot of compassion for both of my parents. They both, there was a lot of pain for them. And it was just tricky for a child to grow up in that kind of environment. I've been learning to let that go and to be a little messier, be a little dirtier, be a little even swampier, and let that be okay. There was a toxic swamp, but you know what? There are also sunflowers and mimosas.
So, for those of you that don't know, because Rachel didn't know, a mimosa is a type of tree and it does not grow too far north, but it's one of my favorite, most beautiful trees. It grows these beautiful pink frilly blooms. And I used to just climb them and I used to sit under them, and they were like dreaming trees.
I found that line that I wanted to point to in your poem. Its incinerated remains pregnant with family memories. I mean, I just love that here you are, you're dealing in death, you're dealing in cremated remains in a sense of this house, but it's pregnant. It's pregnant with the family memories. And I love these contrasts in the poem of birth and death in the same line. And it's just surprising and delightful. This is a heavy moment because this house was sacrificed in a controlled burn and it's turned frozen ash under a bloody moon. But then the incinerated remains are pregnant with family memories, and singed fairy wings carry the scent of burnt wrapping paper. I mean, how amazing is that to have those contrasts of the weight and the pain of the loss, and yet also the delight and the beauty in it. It's just gorgeous writing.
Oh, thank you. You're very generous with your words. To me, Rachel, both of the poems were about transformation. And I think that was what I was trying to convey, because that was what I was gathering from your poem. So this transformation, acknowledging and letting go of the past to move forward and without trying to be perfect. Because I think the theme of home that runs through both of our poems is the discovery that home is not a place, but it's actually found within each of us. We just have to go looking and knock on the door.
It has been such a delight to have you here, and I just love how it all unfolded. And I really appreciate your fullness and depth of presence, not only in reading the poem and in writing your poem, but also in talking with me here today.
Well, I feel I've grown as a poet and a person in your presence and in this podcast. And I cannot wait to hear your poem in your voice.
And on that note, shall we read our own poems?
Controlled burn. I drove by my old home the other day. Funny how I couldn't remember the names of the roads or which was the right turn down memory lane. Yet, like a homing pigeon, I eventually found my way back to the nest, back to this barren land I once called home. I wonder, do houses cherish a child's divine dreams? Do they preserve their ancestral lineage as mortar between yellow bricks? Do they knit generations of families together into healing prayers? Do their descendants speak echoes of their origins, telling tales around the kitchen table while giving thanks for food served on chipped china plates? This place, my childhood home, where fighting roosters roamed free, we rose every day to the same old scrambled eggs and the rhythms of homework and household chores. Mimosas were not found in glasses with ice, but trees adorned in frilly pink skirts. In this home, the workday ended by the monotonous beep of the microwave. Everyday labors were rewarded with mediocre mystery meats, too tough to chew, even harder to swallow. Religion became a social sport, played against imaginary rivals where only perfect goals counted. The purpose of life was simmered down to a game of potluck in Sunday dresses. In this house, we were bilingual, speaking not only our native tongue, but also the subterranean language of insinuation and expectation. Self-righteous commandments incanted as thou shalt nots to protect a fragile mirage. Success was marked in dollars and cents. something for daughters to achieve if they were to be seen behind the incarnation of prodigal sons. I left this house of incarceration to look deep into toxic things. Toxicology, not taxidermy. I study lethal doses of poisons, not to preserve death for pride's egotistical display, rather an attempt to conserve mankind and save my sanity. Yet this place still whispers my name. I stand on this gravesite over the charred bones of my great ancestral home, bartered away for the almighty dollar before being left bereft. Its flesh sacrificed in a controlled burn turned frozen ash under a bloody moon. Its incinerated remains pregnant with family memories. Singed fairy wings carrying the scent of burnt wrapping paper crumble in my open hands, blown free by the wind's long exhale. May they fertilize this land in spring. May this fertile ground grow upright.
Divine boot camp. In a toxic swamp of festering wounds, fed by an underground river of something's wrong with me, the incarnation begins. Perfection, that fairy glamour hangs in the mist, obscuring the muck, curating a mirage of stilted beauty. From below, stealthy, aggravated, and steamy, resentment, jealousy, and shame bubble up through the sludge, poisoning the air. These are the noxious fumes that taught my lungs constriction and wheezing, to practice asthma to save me from inhaling ages of psychic sewage, byproduct of unfelt feelings, those ignored messengers, and disinherited needs, yearning orphaned quarks of vitality and meaning, oozing down ancestral lines from generation to generation, partially thwarted by towering dams of blame, diverting vibrancy, separating the living from life. This is the curse that keeps on giving. This is the place where God divided into self and other, where she went as far from himself as he could go, where duality seems more real than singularity, isolation more true than belonging, where loneliness reigns, consuming the heart. In this God-forsaken wasteland, some part of me lingers, struggling to stand on arthritic plantar fasciitic feet, despite the agonized memory of contortion in my lumbosacral spine, longing for solid ground to support, relieve, and nourish my bones, nerves, soul. Here, stifled by, "You can tell me anything," and "You mustn't tell anyone," and "Not like that, like this," and "You don't understand business," and "I know you better than you know yourself," and "I will never let you fail." Here, I gasp for encouragement, acceptance, respect, freedom, understanding, compassion, inclusion, belonging, peace, and truth. Long ago, I dreamed myself out of the swamp, crawling on my belly, then swimming into crystal clear water. Refreshed and cleansed, I climbed out of ooze onto terra firma, drenched in sun. but gurglings whispered deep in my bowels and betrayed searing pain and noxious ooze colonizing my gut, leaking through membranes into the machine, up to the motherboard, gunking up the works, short-circuiting the system, frying the wires, sending false messages. Failure alert, system failing, I am failing, am failure. The swamp is where the incarnation began, but it is not home. Still, I'm not proud. After so many years and tears and energy and time and money and attention and intention and care poured into clawing my way out, sloughing off the sludge and purifying myself, the sludge yet lives in me, clogging the internal mechanism, keeping me from running optimally, keeping me from home. Never again, the ancestors say. I will not be, am not victim, not swamp thing. Swamp survivor I am. Learning to thrive, amateur gardener learning to cultivate sunflower seeds, hiding in the muck, nature's alchemists patiently waiting the season to bloom and grow to maturity, to absorb the poison and transmute it into good medicine. Toxic swamp becomes fertile ground, restoring the living to life. And standing on my own two widespread feet, in my naturally curving erect spine, on this now nutrient-rich, oxygen-fed earth, I breathe and become big enough, brave enough, awake enough to feel rage and terror and despair and longing. Here, in the very spot where the incarnation began, may I begin again. May I reclaim dignity, respect, purpose, connection, and contribution. May I find comfort, knowing I'm not alone in feeling and not feeling, in needing and longing and mourning and being. And may I let myself be. Suffering doesn't make us weak or defective. It makes us alive. Perhaps it's the divine boot camp for humility, strength, and wisdom, where in the presence of others, I learn to honor life moving through me as you learn to honor life moving in you. Poetry Between Friends is produced by Rachel Schroeder. Music composed, produced, and performed by Andrew Vevers. Sound engineering by Revision Sound. Cover art by Matthew Warren Lane. This episode was recorded in New York City on unceded Lenape land and in Otisfield, Maine on Wabanaki land. It was engineered, edited, and mixed in Louisville, Texas on Humanos and Kickapoo land. To learn more about Derralyn Rennix and her unique offerings, email her at meaningfullife207@gmail.com. If you like what you heard, subscribe and share on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you listen. Visit us on Facebook and on Instagram at poetry_between_friends. Find the poems, read along, and join the conversation at poetrybetweenfriends.substack.com. And if you feel inspired, leave us a voice memo on our Spotify page. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, Rachel, I wrote this haiku for today. Friends discuss poems. Please join us on your commute. Let's all have some fun.
I love that. That could be like the motto haiku for this podcast.